I stood motionless by the window of our London townhouse as the heavy rain lashed relentlessly against the tall glass panes, watching my husband carefully pack his leather travel bags with a cold indifference that cut deeper than any heated argument ever could. For 8 long years I had been the silent force behind his rapid rise in the heritage restoration industry, quietly developing every structural algorithm, calculation system, and restoration blueprint while he stood in front of press cameras accepting the public praise. On his bedside table, his phone illuminated repeatedly with glowing private messages from a woman saved under an innocent contact code, each soft chime causing a subtle smile to touch his lips, while he casually explained to me that he was leaving for the Swiss Alps at midnight for an urgent business trip. He spoke of his mistress as though her luxury, social status, and demands were natural rewards he deeply deserved, entirely untroubled by the reality that he was abandoning our marriage while claiming full legal ownership of my entire life work. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked down at my own phone screen, where an urgent alert from my personal solicitor confirmed my worst fears. My independent foundation accounts had been systematically drained over the past 6 months, every single penny routed into a private shell company registered in an offshore jurisdiction. The sheer scale of his calculated cruelty left me breathless, forcing me to realize that I was not merely being replaced in his personal life, but actively stripped of my financial independence, my professional reputation, and my future. I took a slow step toward him across the thick Persian rug, determined to demand a full explanation for the stolen patents, the altered accounts, and the forged transfer documents I had discovered earlier that afternoon. Before I could speak his name, a firm and echoing knock sounded from the heavy wooden front door downstairs. The sharp sound vibrated through the quiet hallways of the house, cutting through the tense atmosphere of the bedroom. Moments later, my housekeeper ushered a tall, commanding figure up the stairs and into the room, his dark, wet overcoat carrying the unmistakable chill of the evening storm outside. Arthur Vance, the formidable chairman of Vance Global Holdings and the husband of the very woman my partner was planning to leave me for, stepped into the soft, warm light of the bedroom with an expression of absolute, calculated control. Without uttering a single word of anger or dramatic passion, he walked to the center of the room and placed a thick leather dossier directly onto the mahogany writing desk. The contents of that file revealed undeniable proof that my husband had not only entered an illicit affair with Victoria Vance, but was currently attempting to sell my proprietary restoration models to an overseas corporate consortium under fraudulent pretenses. As I stared at the devastating evidence of ultimate betrayal laid out across the polished wood, Arthur looked directly into my eyes and softly asked if I was finally ready to stop protecting the man who had spent years systematically dismantling my life. The silence in the grand bedroom grew so heavy that the sound of the storm outside seemed to fade into a dull background hum. Marcus turned slowly from his half-packed leather suitcase, his fingers freezing on the brass buckle of his bag as his eyes registered Arthur Vance, standing calmly near the doorway. A brief, ugly flicker of panic crossed my husband's face, but he quickly smoothed his features back into the confident, charming mask he routinely used when managing wealthy corporate clients or difficult board members. He cleared his throat, lifted his chin, and declared in a sharp tone that Arthur was intruding in a private family residence, adding that whatever business brought him here on a rainy night could wait for formal office hours tomorrow morning. Arthur did not flinch, step back, or raise his voice by a single tone. He replied with chilling precision that private family matters ended the moment my husband used his corporate account to charter a luxury private flight to Zurich for Victoria and downloaded confidential tender documents directly from his secure server. I stared at Marcus, my fingers clutching the edge of the mahogany desk so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white under the ambient light. Only 8 hours ago, Marcus had sat across from me at our morning breakfast table, drinking the hot tea I had prepared for him, complaining at length about an early morning train journey he supposedly had to take to Yorkshire to inspect timber frames on a ruined chapel. He had looked me in the eyes, smiled, and kissed my cheek before walking out the front door. Now, standing only a few feet away from me, he refused to meet my gaze. He kept his eyes fixed entirely on Arthur, claiming with arrogant indifference that he and Victoria were consenting adults and that a cold, failing marriage was not his responsibility to repair. Arthur reached inside his tailored coat and produced a second set of printed bank statements and legal affidavits. He stated that his internal auditors had discovered abnormal financial transfers between his firm's Swiss subsidiary and an obscure shell company named Vanguard Restoration, an entity registered using my maiden name without my knowledge. He calmly explained to the room that Marcus had forged my digital authorization on bank mandates 6 months ago in order to transfer the master patent rights of the Sterling Adaptive Framework into his absolute control. I reached out and took the paper from Arthur's hands, my eyes rapidly scanning the dense technical text and legal clauses. The Sterling Adaptive Framework was the mathematical system I had spent 7 full years developing in complete isolation. It was an advanced engineering model designed to calculate structural load stress, moisture decay, and stone degradation in centuries-old historic buildings without requiring invasive physical testing. I had written every single line of source code at my grandmother's dining table, while Marcus was still struggling to secure his first small commercial contract as an independent contractor. The patent had always been registered in my maiden name, Clara Hale, specifically to preserve my independent professional standing within the engineering community. Looking at the bottom of the document, I saw my signature, a crude digital reproduction copied directly from an old wedding anniversary card I had given him 3 years ago. Marcus exhaled a long, irritated breath and waved his hand dismissively, as if I were causing a scene over a minor clerical oversight. He claimed that handling the document transfer was an administrative necessity to ensure our firm remained eligible for a major European heritage grant, while I was recovering from a severe bout of illness in hospital. Arthur corrected him immediately without hesitation, revealing to us both that Marcus had already offered to license the framework to a major Munich consortium in exchange for a 50% equity stake in their expansion operations. Looking at my husband in that dimly lit room, the awful truth finally settled in my chest with total clarity. His emotional distance, his late nights, his sudden irritation whenever I asked about firm finances over the past year had not been caused by work stress or overwork. He had spent months methodically liquidating my personal assets, stealing my intellectual property, and setting up a shadow life with Victoria Rowan so he could exit our marriage a wealthy, independent man while leaving me legally liable for his corporate fraud. I stood frozen in the center of the bedroom, holding the forged transfer document as the full reality of my husband's deception settled over me. 8 years ago, when we first met at a university seminar, Marcus was an ambitious young project manager with charm and boundless confidence, but very little technical expertise. I was a quiet structural analyst who preferred equations, historical archives, and blueprints to networking events and press releases. When he proposed creating Sterling Restoration together, I believed we were building a true partnership based on mutual trust and shared values. I provided the complete technical foundation, wrote every software program, and even remortgaged my grandmother's house to provide our initial operating capital after his first business partner walked out on him. Over the years, Marcus quietly and methodically rewrote our history. At formal industry dinners, he spoke of the software as his personal vision. At corporate board meetings, he presented my complex technical assessments as his own analytical work. When I gently brought up the matter, reminding him that my name belonged on the published research papers, he dismissed my concerns, calling me overly sensitive, paranoid, and corporate naive. He convinced me that my quiet personality was better suited for the background, while he managed the public identity, press relations, and client acquisition for the firm. I allowed it because I loved him, and because I naively believed that peace in a marriage was worth more than public recognition or professional credit. The subtle warning signs had been present for months, if only I had chosen to pay attention. Strange mail from offshore financial groups arriving in unmarked envelopes, Marcus repeatedly asking me to sign blank corporate affidavits under the convenient pretense of tax efficiency and routine compliance. His sudden, firm insistence that I stop attending quarterly review meetings with our primary charitable partner, the St. Jude Heritage Trust. I had trusted him blindly, assuming he was protecting my research time so I could focus on completing the new software updates. Standing in our bedroom, I looked at him and demanded that he look me in the eye and deny forging my signature on those legal documents. Marcus sneered, telling me that we built the firm together, but claiming that my mathematical algorithms were entirely useless without his salesmanship, connections, and personal charm. He declared with supreme arrogance that no one in the heritage industry knew who I was, that the press cared only about him, and that Victoria understood true corporate ambition. I told him to pick up his luggage, leave his keys on the table, and never step foot inside our house again. He reminded me arrogantly that the company paid the monthly mortgage, but I countered immediately that the house had belonged to my family decades before Sterling Restoration existed, and that every single mortgage payment had been drawn from my personal software royalty accounts. Marcus realized in that moment that he would get no tears, no screaming, and no dramatic begging from me. He gripped the handle of his bag, brushed past Arthur without looking back, and slammed the heavy front door shut. The echo vibrated straight through the floorboards of the house. I stood alone in the bedroom with Arthur, the relentless storm continuing its steady rhythm against the windows. Arthur placed the complete forensic audit file onto the mahogany desk, explaining that he had intervened tonight specifically to prevent his own corporate legal team from freezing my personal accounts as a co-conspirator in the fraud. He offered the full support of his senior litigators for the upcoming legal confrontation. I asked him directly why he was helping me, and he replied that he recognized when a predator targeted someone whose talent far exceeded their suspicion. He stated clearly that he wanted a clean, legal licensing agreement for my framework once I regained full control of my firm, and personally expected us both to be far too intelligent to mistake mutual betrayal for reckless behavior. Before I could fully process his words, Arthur checked his dark tablet and his expression darkened significantly. He looked up at me and revealed that Marcus had not simply driven away to a hotel or the airport. My husband had just instructed the corporate secretary to convene an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, where he intended to execute the final transfer of the software rights in my absence, and permanently strip me of all remaining advisory authority within the firm. At precisely 8:30 the following morning, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Restoration headquarters in central London. I wore an ivory-tailored suit, my mother gold watch on my wrist, and carried a leather briefcase containing my original patent registration papers and historic foundation deeds. The receptionist behind the marble desk looked up with startled sympathy, stammering that Marcus had issued explicit orders to deactivate my security access due to an emergency internal corporate restructuring. Before she could reach for her phone, the glass doors opened behind me, and Arthur Vance entered the lobby accompanied by 2 senior corporate litigators and an independent forensic IT investigator. The morning chatter across the open plan reception died instantly as Arthur walked to my side. We rode the private elevator to the top floor in absolute silence, every staff member watching us through the glass partition walls. I had spent 8 years quietly training those junior engineers and site supervisors while Marcus accepted the public awards. That morning, I stopped allowing him to hide behind my labor. Inside the executive boardroom, Marcus was standing at the head of the long oak table, presenting a slide deck regarding the upcoming European merger. Victoria Rowan occupied the leather chair beside him, wearing an emerald silk dress and the diamond band Arthur had given her 5 years ago. Several independent board members sat along the sides looking visibly uncomfortable. When Marcus saw me walk into the room alongside Arthur, every trace of color left his face. He stood up abruptly, slammed his tablet onto the table, and declared that disgruntled spouses had no operational standing in an executive board meeting. Arthur calmly took a seat at the far end of the table, while his solicitors distributed thick blue evidence folders to every director present. Arthur stated with quiet authority that I was attending as the sole director of Meridian Logic, the independent holding entity that owned the master patent for the software Sterling Restoration was currently trying to sell. Victoria sneered, claiming that Marcus had built the firm from scratch, while I sat in a quiet basement office doing basic administrative paperwork, accusing me of trying to ruin his career simply because he had moved on with his life. I looked directly into her eyes and revealed that she had personally downloaded proprietary client files from Arthur corporate server on 4 separate nights in November, transferring them to a shell investment group in Singapore managed by her own brother. Victoria's smile vanished instantly, her face turning completely pale. My lead solicitor then presented the digital forensic evidence, proving that the electronic signature on the final patent assignment had been forged using Marcus' personal laptop at 2 a.m. 3 weeks prior. Sir Thomas, the senior structural director on the board, flipped through the technical logs, looked at Marcus, and demanded an immediate explanation. I stepped to the head of the table and announced that, effective at noon, Meridian Logic was suspending Sterling Restoration license to use the Adaptive Framework platform. All operational engineering tools would be locked pending a full forensic audit for unauthorized access and unpaid royalties. I added that I had filed for an emergency freeze on all corporate asset transfers. Marcus glared at me, his voice shaking with anger, as he claimed I could not destroy the company over personal bitterness. I responded that basic safety algorithms would remain active to protect ongoing building sites, but I was finished allowing him to profit from work he claimed was insignificant. The board voted within 30 minutes to place Marcus on immediate administrative leave and initiate a full financial audit. After the meeting, Marcus trapped me near the floor-to-ceiling windows, shouting that I had humiliated him in front of his board. I replied that he had humiliated himself the moment he forged my signature, and walked away without looking back. Over the next fortnight, The fourth-floor conference room became my daily workplace. I worked alongside 6 forensic accountants, unraveling years of corporate ledgers. We discovered that Marcus had diverted over £4 million through fraudulent consulting fees paid to an interior design firm registered under Victoria maiden name. Arthur worked out of a smaller office across the corridor. He never entered my audit room without knocking gently, and never requested documents my legal team had not approved. His quiet respect for my space meant more than any grand romantic statement. Marcus had always interrupted my explanations and called it teamwork. Arthur listened until I finished my thought and asked precise, analytical questions. On the 12th evening of the audit, we uncovered something far worse than hidden consulting fees. Sterling Restoration managed several historic properties owned by the St. Jude Heritage Trust, a charity providing temporary residential care for children undergoing long-term medical treatments. Nearly £2 million of dedicated structural renovation funds were completely missing from their reserve account. The withdrawals had been authorized personally by Marcus using fake invoices from Victoria's Shell Company for safety upgrades that had never been constructed. I stared at site inspection photographs showing peeling plaster, crumbling masonry, and rusted support beams where accessible fire exits and structural steel reinforcements were supposed to have been built. My grief turned into absolute, uncompromising resolve. He had not merely cheated on our marriage. He had placed vulnerable children in danger to fund a life of unearned luxury. Arthur stood beside my chair as I highlighted the internal project tag, MS Reserve. Arthur added that Victoria had used those exact funds to pay the initial deposit on a private villa overlooking Lake Como. We immediately backed up the servers and prepared a secure evidence file for law enforcement. 2 days later, Victoria sent a message requesting a private meeting at a Mayfair hotel restaurant to settle matters without lawyers. I attended the meeting wearing a legally approved recording device, while Arthur remained nearby with legal counsel. Victoria offered me £10 million from her cousin's Singapore fund if I dropped the fraud charges and signed over the software rights. I refused, pointing out that she was begging for a settlement because Arthur had frozen her corporate credit access. When Arthur and my solicitor entered the room, Victoria realized her offer had been captured on tape. In sheer panic, she blurted out that Marcus had created the fake reserve account and assured her that I was too weak and uninvolved to ever check the legal registries. That evening, as I stood by the window of Arthur's office looking out over the city lights, I admitted my fear of becoming another clever asset in his corporate portfolio. Arthur walked over, leaving comfortable space between us, and placed a small brass key onto the desk. He explained it belonged to his late mother cottage in Cornwall, telling me I could use it for as long as I needed with 0 conditions attached to my software or our professional relationship. He stated gently that peace was not something Marcus should ever be allowed to steal from me again. As my fingers closed around the cold brass key, I realized Arthur was offering me the one thing my husband had denied me for 8 years, the total freedom to stand entirely on my own feet. The days leading up to the preliminary court hearing were defined by relentless, exhaustive preparation. Every morning at 7, I met with my lead barrister, Eleanor Vance, a brilliant strategist who analyzed every fragment of evidence with surgical precision. Together with Arthur forensic accountants, we mapped out the complete financial network Marcus and Victoria had constructed over 4 long years. We discovered 3 additional offshore accounts registered in the Channel Islands, each directly connected to subcontracts issued for non-existent engineering assessments. Marcus had systematically forged my signature on internal compliance certificates, trusting that my complete absence from corporate board meetings would keep me entirely unaware of the illegal operations. His supreme arrogance had been his defining flaw. He had assumed that because I was quiet, I was oblivious, and because I loved him, I would never question his authority or audit his accounts. In the quiet hours of the night, while reviewing long spreadsheets of numbers in my study, I often thought about the years I had lost. I recalled sitting alone at my drafting table until dawn, while Marcus attended glamorous industry galas, reassuring myself that my quiet contribution behind the scenes was enough. I recalled the times he had gently laughed off my desire to be named as co-author on major restoration journal papers, claiming that public exposure would only disrupt my technical focus. I saw now with complete clarity that every gentle word had been a carefully placed stone in a wall designed to keep me trapped, dependent, and invisible. The legal battle reached its absolute breaking point 3 weeks later inside the packed gallery of the High Court of Justice in London. Marcus arrived flanked by 3 high-profile barristers wearing a tailored navy suit meant to project calm confidence and absolute innocence. Victoria sat 2 rows behind him in the public gallery, dressed in dark linen, avoiding all eye contact with both Marcus and his legal counsel. On our side of the courtroom, Arthur sat quietly beside me, his presence steady and unshakable as my legal counsel prepared our final submissions. The gallery was packed with journalists, corporate representatives, and trustees from the St. Jude Heritage Trust. Marcus believed that by filing his emergency claim of mental incapacity against me, he would force a quick, private financial settlement to avoid a public trial. He had completely miscalculated my resolve. My lead barrister stood up and addressed the judge, systematically dismantling every false claim Marcus had filed. Document by document, we presented the forensic evidence. The digital metadata proving the forged electronic signatures on my patent assignments was laid bare on the large courtroom monitors. The complete financial trail of the missing £2 million from the St. Jude Charity Foundation was displayed in brutal detail, showing the exact wire transfers that funded Victoria Lake Como deposit and Marcus' private Swiss accounts. When Marcus was called to the stand to testify under oath, his artificial composure completely disintegrated under cross-examination. Pressed on the specific project codes and forged documents, he panicked, pointing an accusing finger at Victoria and shouting that she had engineered the entire financial scheme to pay off her personal debts. Victoria leapt to her feet from the gallery, furiously shouting back that Marcus had stolen my software files because his firm was on the brink of insolvency long before they ever met. The courtroom erupted into total chaos as the 2 people who had once described their betrayal as a grand, liberating romance turned on each other beneath the cold lights of the courtroom, exposing every secret, lie, and hidden motive in front of the judge, the press, and the public. I sat quietly at my counsel table, watching the spectacle with neither anger nor delight. The man I had spent 11 years protecting was destroying himself, not through any cruelty of mine, but through the sheer weight of his own greed and actions. The judge called for order, slamming his gavel down repeatedly, and issued an immediate ruling. Marcus' emergency injunction was dismissed with prejudice. All frozen assets of Sterling Restoration were placed under the control of an independent court receiver, and the court formally referred both Marcus and Victoria to the Serious Fraud Office for criminal prosecution regarding wire fraud, corporate theft, and the embezzlement of charitable foundation funds. As security officers escorted Marcus out of the courtroom toward waiting federal investigators, He stopped in the aisle and looked back at me, his face pale and completely drained of all arrogance. He begged me to tell them it was all a terrible misunderstanding and claimed he had built that company for us. I looked directly into his eyes, my voice steady and clear enough for everyone in the gallery to hear, telling him that he had not built it for us, but had built it entirely on top of my silence, and that I was done being silent forever. If you are enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to English Stories Hub. A simple like helps more people discover these stories, and your support inspires us to create new ones. Now let us continue with the final chapter. Arthur stood beside me as we walked down the grand stone steps of the Royal Courts of Justice into the bright afternoon light. Flashbulbs went off in rapid succession as reporters shouted questions from behind the security barricades, but I held my head high, stepping past the cameras with a calm, unyielding dignity that I had not felt in over a decade. 2 months later, the formal criminal proceedings reached their swift conclusion. Faced with indisputable digital evidence, financial metadata, and recorded confessions, Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple counts of corporate fraud, forgery, and grand embezzlement. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal custody and ordered to make full financial restitution to the St. Jude Heritage Trust. Victoria accepted a plea agreement for her direct involvement in the trade secret theft, receiving a suspended sentence, severe financial penalties, and complete legal forfeiture of all her foreign assets. Sterling restoration was systematically liquidated under strict court supervision. I officially reclaimed 100% ownership of the Sterling Adaptive Framework and re-established my independent engineering firm under my maiden name, Hale Engineering Solutions. With Arthur expert guidance and structural advice, we designed a transparent, highly profitable global licensing model that protected every single line of source code while securing total financial independence for my future. The stolen £2 million were fully recovered and returned to the St. Jude Foundation reserve accounts, allowing construction to finally begin on the new, safe Children Medical Wings in Sussex. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood on the wooden deck of the seaside cottage in Cornwall that Arthur had offered me during my darkest hour. The sun was setting over the Atlantic Ocean, casting a deep golden light across the water. The coastal breeze was cool and clean, carrying the fresh scent of sea salt and wild grass. Footsteps sounded softly behind me on the wooden steps, and Arthur walked onto the porch carrying 2 warm mugs of black tea. He handed one to me and leaned against the railing, looking out at the endless horizon, asking gently if the quiet was as good as I had hoped it would be. I looked down at my hands and replied softly that it was better than I could have imagined. I admitted that for years I had mistakenly believed that love meant making myself invisible so that someone else could shine, and that silent endurance was the same thing as loyalty. Arthur turned his gray eyes toward me, holding my gaze with absolute warmth, sincerity, and respect, asking what I thought now. I looked into his eyes and told him that now I knew real strength was knowing your own worth, reaching out to place my hand over his on the wooden rail and adding that a true partnership never asked you to disappear or make yourself small. A genuine, gentle smile touched Arthur's face as his fingers closed around mine. Standing there beneath the vast open sky, listening to the steady rhythm of the crashing waves below, I realized that my ultimate victory had never been about destroying Marcus or seeking revenge. It had been about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my work, and my inner peace. The painful past was finally behind me, and for the very first time in my life, the future belonged entirely to me. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please leave a thoughtful comment and let us know what you felt. We would also love to hear what kind of stories you would like to listen to next on our channel. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to English Stories Hub. A brand new story is coming very soon, and we cannot wait to share it with you. Thank you for your ongoing support, your wonderful comments, and for being such an active part of our growing community. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep the stories alive.